My son stopped taking my calls. It happened gradually. At first, he would let it go to voicemail. Then he started hanging up on me, and then he just stopped answering at all. Sometimes I would call, and he would call back and yell at me for bothering him. He was going through a phase in his life where he thought he knew better than everyone else and felt like an outcast because he had no friends or girlfriend. But I could see that he was really unhappy. I got worried when he stopped taking my calls altogether. I knew something must be wrong. I kept calling and calling, but there was no reply. After 2 weeks of not hearing his voice, I decided to pay him a surprise visit. I took the bus to his city and went straight to his apartment. I knocked on the door and waited. A minute later, his roommate opened the door. I asked if my son was home, but he said he hadn't seen him in a few days. He suggested I should go home because my son wasn't there, but I refused and told him I would wait. So the guy went back into his room and I waited some more. Hours passed by and I heard voices coming from the other room. My son came out and saw me. He looked surprised and didn't seem happy about me being there. He told me that his roommate said he was out, so he left the apartment. He said he only left for a while to clear his mind, but I knew he was lying. I knew something was wrong. His eyes were red and swollen, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I tried talking to him, but he just pushed me away and went back to his room. I sat down on the couch and called his name, but instead of answering, he put on headphones and turned on loud music. After a while, I heard him talking to someone on the phone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I could tell it was important because he kept saying, "I'm sorry," over and over again. I don't know how long I sat there waiting, but eventually I fell asleep. When I woke up, the sun was shining in through the window. It was getting late, so I decided to go home. I got on the bus and sat down. As I pulled out my phone to call a cab, I realized I had a new voicemail. It was from my son. I played it and his voice sounded different, weaker, like he was crying. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I haven't been taking your calls, but I promise I'll call you back soon." Then he paused for a moment and continued, No, don't hang up. Please stay on the line." But I already had. I pressed the end call button without realizing it. As soon as I hung up, another notification popped up. It was a text message from him. It read, "I'm sorry, Mom. I love you." Then he sent another one. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll explain everything when I see you next. Please don't hang up. I'm begging you. I need your help. I'm scared. I don't want to die." I responded, "What's wrong? Where are you?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he called back and the phone went straight to voicemail. I kept trying to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. Over and over and over, I sat there holding my phone, listening to the same message. It drove me crazy. I didn't know what to do. I got up and walked around the house, but I couldn't focus on anything. All I could think about was my son's voicemails. Why did he sound so scared? What did he mean? I kept replaying the messages in my head, trying to figure out what he was trying to tell me. Finally, I decided to go back to his apartment. I called his roommate and asked if my son was there, but he said he still hadn't seen him. I told him I was worried about my son, but the guy just laughed and said he didn't care. He said if I wanted to find my son, I would have to look elsewhere. I thanked him for his help and hung up. When I arrived at the apartment, I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. I walked inside and called out my son's name, but there was no answer. I looked around and noticed that some of his things were missing. His wallet, phone, and car keys were gone. I checked his bedroom, but he wasn't there either. I found a note on his pillow that read, "Gone to the hospital. Don't worry about me." Below the note was a drawing of a heart. I knew something was wrong. I tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. I drove to the nearest hospital, but they said they hadn't seen my son. I went to several hospitals, but none of them had seen him. I was about to give up hope when I remembered that he had mentioned something about a nurse. I went back to his apartment and searched for any sign of who might have taken care of him. I found a crumpled piece of paper in the trash can with a name written on it. I smoothed out the paper and read, "Nurse Betty." I didn't know any nurses by that name, but I knew the city had a big hospital downtown. I got in my car and drove there. When I arrived, I went straight to the information desk and asked about Nurse Betty. The clerk said she didn't work there, but I could ask at the information booth outside. I went outside and asked the booth attendant, but he said he didn't know anything about Nurse Betty. Just when I was about to lose hope, a woman walked by and I asked her if she knew where I could find Nurse Betty. She smiled and said, "You're looking for Betty. She's my sister. Why do you want to talk to her?" I explained about my son and asked if she knew where he was. She thought for a moment and then said, "I think I know which patient you're talking about. Follow me." We walked down the hallway until we reached a room at the end. The woman knocked on the door and went inside. I stood there listening and heard my son's voice. It was weak and shaky. He said, "Mom, is that you?" The woman opened the door and said, "Yes, it's me." She stepped aside and gestured for me to go in. I walked into the room and saw my son lying in the bed. He looked pale and skinny. He had tubes attached to his arms and a bandage around his head. He was so different from the strong, healthy boy I remembered. When he saw me, a tear rolled down his cheek. He tried to speak, but his throat must have been sore because all that came out was a croak. I rushed to his side and held his hand. It was cold and lifeless. I asked where Nurse Betty was, but before she could answer, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Nurse Betty entered the room and introduced herself. She said she had been taking care of my son, but she didn't know why he had been admitted. She said she would go get the doctor. While I waited, I talked to my son. I asked him what happened, but he just shook his head. I knew he was hiding something from me, but I didn't push him. I didn't want to upset him. I just sat there holding his hand and telling him how much I loved him. The doctor came in and examined my son. He told me that my son had been brought to the hospital unconscious and had been in a coma ever since. He said they had done everything they could, but there was nothing more they could do. He said my son wouldn't wake up. I sat there listening to him, but I couldn't understand a word he was saying. All I could think about was how much I loved my son and how I would never get to see him again. The last thing I remember is kneeling beside his bed and whispering, "I love you," over and over again until I fell asleep.